And today I am going to touch a subject that I don't think gets enough attention. I do spend a large portion of my time complaining about these mRNA shots, mostly because as a doctor, I'm in the clinic and I'm constantly reminded because, I mean, even this morning, I saw a patient that was injured from the COVID shots. But we cannot forget what happened in the hospitals. And unfortunately, our current administration does not seem interested in addressing this, and it's just not getting enough public attention. So today we're going to talk to the family members of two victims of hospital protocols. And they're just two people, but this was happening all over the country, if not all over the world. And we saw, all these hospitals going by a playbook set by administrators, and with no thinking outside the box, willingness to try other things, and yet relying on a very new medication, which had not done well in previous trials, but all of a sudden became the standard of care for hospitalized COVID patients. There was a side movement where they were using a cocktail of medications, basically, and this is what I was doing, throwing the kitchen sink at patients, using time-tested medications, and seeing that these strategies were working. But unfortunately, and I did get wrapped up in this, as with the medical board situation, with the patient that was dying, trying to get an alternative medication and going to court over that. But let's focus on my guests today, their stories. I have Teresa Sinkowicz, who is the vice president of the Betrayal Project, which is a wonderful organization that has gathered these stories of patients, their family members, bringing these stories of hospital protocols killing and harming patients across the country. And I know, Teresa, you lost your not your dad, your father, Robert, over this issue. And then you also you are friends, or you're a church member with our other guest, Julie, and Julie's daughter, Jessica Hallgren. Just tragic situation, 39 years old, pregnant, and succumbed to the hospital protocol. So thank y'all so much for coming today. And I know this is difficult, but Teresa, I want to start with you, and I want you to just talk about your organization and sort of what led you to start it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mary, first of all, thank you for having us on here. And we watch your show daily. So if this is anybody's first time tuning in, we encourage them to subscribe to your channel and listen to this as well, as you get a lot of good information and good guests. So thank you for having us. Yes, Betrayal Project USA. We actually started this particular project last year after several years of working together on various other initiatives and projects together. Gail and a host of, I think there was 12 total board members that we came together with the sole mission to advance accountability, right, for what happened in the hospitals. We were huge advocates for what also was going on in the vaccine movements. We have a lot of stories that we have collected from vaccine injuries and deaths as well. So our main mission, of course, was to raise awareness about what was happening in the hospital specifically, and then also to achieve accountability for, having our officials actually come out, because they do know about this. And so we formed this organization with that in mind, knowing that there are still, we believe, 1.6 million people with stories that are very similar to mine and to Julie's, that are out there. I worked particularly in Michigan, where I'm from. Julie's also in Michigan, but we are a national victim-led organization. So everyone on our board, it was a victim of this. And so we have firsthand experience for what we're seeing. So taking a little step back, this was right before 2020. Myself and a lot of members, let's just say, of my church and friends, we were very grassroots led. And so we tend to navigate towards a lot of news channels, for different people around the nation of what they're actually seeing. We were listening to the mainstream media channels, um, but all we could hear is panic and fear and things that were nonsensical. Wearing masks while you're going into to a grocery store, having to stay 6 feet apart, and just nothing made sense. And so at that time, my family, we were just observing what was happening, but also saying, this isn't making sense. Why would a virus do act like this? Nothing really seemed to add up. And then, of course, the news coming out of New York, where they're saying, "Oh, the hospitals are full. Everybody's dying because of COVID. You have to go get your shots." Um, Again, just the panic, really just didn't seem warranted to myself and a lot of our friends. But we were watching, mindful, just kind of paying attention. It was at that time that I started to kind of follow American frontline doctors, and some other folks that were speaking a different narrative of things that they were seeing and things that were working. And that's actually how we led to yourself as well, kind of following you and what you were doing, to hear, alternative medications for COVID, such as, monoclonal antibodies, but the big one, of course, was ivermectin. So knowing that some things were existing, that and were working from what we were hearing, and then all of a sudden 2021 kind of rolled in with what they called the Delta variant. I, of course, was the first one in my family to Thanksgiving 2021 was pretty hectic around the nation. Everybody was coming down with this variant. And I was the first one. Unfortunately, we were having a Thanksgiving dinner because my family said, you know what, we're going to carry on living our life, and we're going to take vitamin C. We're going to listen to some of these doctors that are speaking, truth and things that they're able to get over this. High doses of vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, all these things, and that's what our plan was. And we were trying to actually obtain ivermectin as well at that time, but it was very hard to come by, just in preparation for it. So I came down with it, and right away I could tell it was not something that was normal to my body. It didn't act like anything I'd ever seen, so right away I started taking high doses of vitamin C and D, but I could tell that I was not doing so well. But I ended up contacting American Frontline Doctors, and they identified that, yeah, we're gonna send you ivermectin, and we're gonna send budesonide and a few other things. And I said, that's great, because I was not doing so well. Well, that same day, this was Thanksgiving weekend. I kind of told my parents to get out, go home, right? Because trying to prevent them from getting sick as well. Well, a few days later, I called to check in on them while I'm still recovering, and they're starting to, get a headache, and they're starting to come down a little bit of symptoms. And one by one, my family members, reported that they were also unwell. All of us were recovering at home. Of course, it wasn't fun, but we were recovering with the treatments that we were hearing about, and we were recovering. But my dad, 70 years old, his name was Robert. He whenever he gets sick, he always gets very dehydrated, and this happens with most other illnesses as well. Just anything that's happening in the winter, and so we thought, okay, usually how we handle this is we go get him hydrated, we get some electrolytes, some other, some oxygen from the hospital, and then he's released. So that was what we expected, was for my dad, what we were going to do. In the meantime, I was still waiting for my ivermectin and budesonide to come from American Frontline Doctors. Mind you, this is just a very few amount of days that this all happened in. I was sick, my mom was sick, everybody in my family was sick. And so they were not allowed in the hospital with my dad, which was the first grievance that we had. He was isolated. So when he walked in, he had a huge headache. He could, he was dizzy, he was not well. And we were hoping that they were going to give him, first of all, we were asking for monoclonal antibodies, and ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine were the things that we were asking for first and foremost. We didn't get a call until about 9 hours later from the hospital. My mom was calling, trying to get an update. Said he's a very, very sick man. Well, yeah, we're all sick. We know how this is rolling. We're going to keep him, and we're going to keep him overnight and keep you updated. There was no mention at this point of the name of remdesivir. This was not mentioned on the phone at all. Again, we had just expected what we were going to get, the same type of treatment as before. There was one thing that we knew about, and we did know that ventilators were killing people.
Mm.
That was a big, and that was consistent in Julie's story, which she'll get to here in just a little bit. But we do know that very few people survived on the ventilator. So that was number one in the hospital. No, don't put them on a ventilator. That was number one. At this point, this is day one, and I'm going to kind of fast forward for the listeners here. We didn't know at this time when he entered in the emergency room, and you having some experience with this, he was given remdesivir right away. We didn't know about it. My mom, who is his, they was supposed to be in charge of his care, didn't was not told about this. He was not told that, this was tested on people for the Ebola trial and killed over 53% of the people that it was tested on. He
Mhm.
was not told that. None of us were even told that he was receiving this. Um, they kept him for another day. All of a sudden, there's talks, another call to my mother. All of a sudden, they're trying to give him morphine. Why does he need morphine? He's not in any pain when we dropped him off.
Mhm.
What's going on?
Mhm.
They said all of a sudden his oxygen is plummeting. His all of a sudden organs are starting to shut down. And we're thinking, this is 2 and 3 days in the hospital. I'm on the phone right away. I think this is day number two with the doctor saying, please, can you give him ivermectin? Please. It could because they were kind of giving my mom the runaround as saying no, making her feel like it's a ridiculous request.
Mhm.
And I, knowing, speaking with American frontline doctors, have a different story that no, this can help you. So I was persisting with the doctors on the phone, mind you, still not well myself. And she said, even if I wanted to, the hospital won't let me give it, and we don't even have it to give, was the response that I was given.
Which
And
hospital is it?
this is in northern Michigan, Charlevoix Munson Hospital, in Charlevoix, Michigan, the northern part. So, uh, which okay, so I hung up the phone and right away I'm dialing to my resources, saying, okay, clearly we're not going to get any help from them. I said, well, what are you giving him? And she did not mention remdesivir to me at that point in time. There was no mention of this drug remdesivir. Day three approaches, and all of a sudden, my mom gets a call in the middle of the night saying my dad is coding, he's unresponsive. And I'm thinking, what in the heck are they doing? This is day three in the hospital. He's supposed to be getting better. He's on morphine now. They've given him a whole host of other drugs that we knew nothing about. And he's trying to pull out his catheter. He's falling out of bed, and now they've restrained him into the bed. Very limited hours on visitation. And so, again, this happened very quickly. By day four, again, she gets another call at the middle of the night saying he's unresponsive. You have to come. Perhaps it looks like this is the last. This is the end of the line. So this
Is
is
he
four
on a
o'clock.
ventilator or
No, so
no?
they actually put him on a BiPAP at this point. He
Mhm.
still refused the ventilator because we didn't know that would not be good. And so at least he was kept on a BiPAP. Although we did learn later that still that wasn't he was just laying flat on his back with such an illness, being forced air into his lungs. All of a sudden they report that his kidneys and his organs are starting to shut down, and I'm thinking, what in the heck are they doing in there? So I had an admission. I was jumping in the car, sick or not, on icy roads in a tundra of Michigan. I'm heading north to go get my dad out of this hospital because I don't know what they're doing. Um, so off I go. This was very early in the morning. By the time I arrived, it was somewhere around 8:30, and I ended up getting a chance to. All of a sudden, he woke up. He was not responsive, and it happened to be that my brother was in the room and putting him on voicemail, and it sounded as if I was going to be able to make it that to get
Mhm.
him out of the hospital. I called my mom right away and say, "Hey, let's make arrangements. Tell the hospital we're going to get him out on hospice and bring him home
Mhm.
so that we can try to get some other control here about what's going on." As soon as the hospital found out that we were trying to remove him from the hospital, things changed very, very quickly. From what I understand, they gave him another dose of other things at that exact moment. And within the hour, they flipped him, and he had a cardiac event, is really what we were told.
Um,
So this was about a half hour before I arrived. Mind you, I was coming to get him out of the hospital that day, and I also had ivermectin in hand, which is another story. Finally arrived, and so I arrived, and my dad had died in the hospital. So the key points about that story and why I kind of wrapped it in is that number one, he was isolated. Number two, he was force injected with remdesivir. I looked through it took about 2.5 months to finally get his medical records, which were very difficult to get
Mm-hmm.
after actually about 10 attempts to try to get them. In looking at them, I'm seeing other medications of, high doses of morphine and remdesivir right on day one. So
Morphine
it,
on day one.
yeah,
I mean,
morphine.
what
Yeah.
did they have a pain scale? Was there, because that's
Yeah, yeah, I know. My dad did not report any pain. I
right.
mean, yeah, muscle fatigue, yeah, which was common, but there was no, I mean, to warrant high doses of morphine consistently, among other things, but those were the two main medications to note. And of
Did
course, go ahead,
did they give
sorry.
him steroids or breathing treatments?
No, I didn't see anything of any steroids listed, anything like that I would have expected to see. Um, Yeah, so there was just so much that happened there that after that point, I still didn't know that it was the remdesivir, that I didn't know that they gave it to him.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Arriving in shock that 4 days, only 4 days in the hospital, looking at my dad, what happened? So we got him, we went through the funeral, we finally got the medical records, and then I saw what he was given, and that led me to the investigation. Now, mind you, I'm going to kind of take a break in the story here and jump over to Julie because we go to church together. Here's what happened. And while my dad had just died, I was getting notices of her 39-year-old daughter, who was my friend, Jessica Hallgren, was pregnant with her seventh child, number seven. So she was a healthy young girl. She ate healthy. Julie's going to tell you all about her. But I'm watching the notices go out about this young girl who I just knew a few days before, healthy, just was taking precautions for her child to get some oxygen. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing things like Julie's going to tell you, strokes and, four C-sections. So, Julie, unless Mary, you're okay with that, I would love to kind of transition a little bit to show you what happened to Jessica, actually. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Julie, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Jessica, like Teresa said, she was 39 years old. She was pregnant with her seventh child. The last three she had at home. She did not want to go to the hospital. It was around Thanksgiving, and they all got sick. All the other kids and her husband, and they had sniffles. They didn't get sick.
Mm-hmm.
They got sick, but hardly at all. Jessica was the last one to get sick, and she had a hard time breathing. And this was the November 31st. Um, she she took her pulse ox at home, called the doctor, and said, it's 85. What do I do? And he said, go to emergency. It's really dangerous for the baby. And that's what she heard, danger for the baby, because she was a really good, healthy mother. So she put the kids to bed and they went to emergency. And they shut the door in her husband, Matt's face.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I sleep with her. I brought her here. And she was isolated from the moment they took her to emergency. From there, they took her to the main hospital. And I believe they gave her remdesivir in emergency. But when she got to the hospital, she asked them, do not give me remdesivir.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a printout too, but it was just the first 4 days. And it showed that they gave her remdesivir, Veklury, and even though she asked not to get it, they still gave it to her.
Mm-hmm.
So she probably hadn't eaten for 3 days. It was Thursday. That was a Tuesday. On Wednesday, the next day, she called me, or she texted me, because she was saving her voice. She said, Mom, can you get me a priest? Because we're devout Catholics. And I'm like, oh my gosh, something's not right here. If she's asking for a priest, all I could think of was last rites, all that. And so I got a hold of somebody, got a priest that had clearance. Our local priest from our parish was not in the area. He comes from like Detroit. It's like 3 hours. And so he comes on Saturdays or Friday night, I believe it was the first Friday. So Matt said, or I'm sorry, Jessica, who hadn't eaten and they did not offer her any food, was just breathing on a BiPAP. So she texted her daughter and said, I'm hungry. Can you get a hold of the cafeteria and order me some food? So she did, and she ate. That was her last meal. So that then Matt told me he was called in on Friday to discuss the baby. They gave her an ultrasound. She found out she was having a girl. So then they decided they're going to take the baby on Saturday. And
how far along is she? How pregnant?
She was 29 weeks.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. So Matt called me and he said, Julie, they're going to vent her. And I'm like, vent her? Why? To have a C-section? And, there's another red flag. Why would they do that?
Mm-hmm.
I know later. I was just talking to a lady yesterday and she said she had 10 C-sections and she was awake for all of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and I know that that's not a necessary thing.
All right.
Anyway, so I called my priest and I said, can you just go up to the hospital and be with Matt and Jessica? And if they vent her, give her last rites and baptize the baby. So it's what us Catholics do. We baptize right away as soon as we can. So what happened was he was there. I didn't get a lot out of Matt, but Matt did tell me she said, if they vent me, I'm not going to make it out. And so the priest later on told me that they tried to vent her. And I don't know if she was like in a conscious sedation, but she was pulling tubes and fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that she fought so hard that they got angry, grabbed her wrists and ankles and strapped her to the bed and forced her to be vented. They sedated her and she never woke up from there. But they took the baby. She was 2 pounds, 14 ounces. The priest did what he needed to do. And that's just, so she had this baby. Matt had to go see the baby and then go to the hospital and, see them both because they brushed the baby right up to the NICU. And then I'm sorry, let's track. So anyways, so she was just vented and a couple days later, Matt told me her kidneys were failing. I'm like, why on earth would a completely healthy girl walk into the hospital, get, just go for a breathing treatment and get vented? And her kidneys are now failing. And I didn't know why. I mean, she knew that if she got vented, she told him I wouldn't make it out. And then they said, oh, she did really well on dialysis. And I'm like, I just didn't understand it. So a couple days later, she had strokes. They said she had 3 strokes into the stem of her brain. Mm-hmm. And the palliative care team called us in and they said, she's not going to be able to walk or talk or eat or, anything. I just look at Matt and I'm thinking, we'll take her, anyway. But so after we talked to the palliative care team and they told us all this, we didn't do anything, we didn't make any decisions or anything. But then a few days later, they called us in again, the palliative care team, and it was myself, Jessica's dad, her husband, Matt, and her eldest daughter, Josie. She was 20 at the time. So we all went in and they discussed that she was hemorrhaging into her strokes. and therefore she was brain dead.
Mm.
And so they left us to talk about it, and we decided, you know, Jessica didn't want to live on any machinery in the first place, so we decided to take her off the vent.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, they said, okay, well, 2 of you can go in. And I'm like, no, all 4 of us are going in. But they, you know, they want to just throw authority at you and say, no, you're not doing it. And I'm like, no, we're doing it. So I got really upset. I mean, like, we are all going in.
Mm-hmm.
So of course we're gowned up, masked up, everything, shields, the whole works. None of us ever wore masks. You know, we were, you know, Jessica didn't vaccinate, and she got kicked out of a lot of places for not wearing a mask.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, so we waited outside the door, and the nurse came in and said, she's off the vent. You know, like it was no big deal. There was no empathy.
Mm-hmm.
So we all went in, and of course Jessica was off the vent. She had blood, like a scab, kind of a bloody scab, by not really a scab, it was just dried up blood by her eye. So I know, like, she hemorrhaged. She must have been bleeding out of everything. And she said, just don't wipe it off. And I'm like, okay. So we went in there, and of course Jessica, without a vent, I think her body, you know how their body tells them to breathe, so she's struggling. But I asked them beforehand, I said, is she gonna suffer? And they said, oh no, we'll give her, she'll have plenty of fentanyl and morphine. And, you know, so she had morphine and fentanyl. And
That they euthanized her then.
yeah, and about 10 minutes later she stopped breathing. And, you know, I looked up at my granddaughter and I said, she's passed. And then the nurse popped her head in and said, oh, she's passed. And just, I could have slapped her. It just made me so mad that they acted like she was just like a dog, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, you know, we just stayed there with her for a while, praying, and then we had to go home and tell all the kids, because there was 11 and 12-year-old, and then Josie was already there, and then the other younger ones were like 4 and 5, 4 and 6. And then Jack was 16 months old, and she was still nursing. And so he would never know his mother, and neither would Margaret. They didn't even let her put her on her chest or anything. So she didn't have that. And I don't know if they can hear you talking or any of that stuff, but you know, what they did was they just took the baby up to NICU, and then, you know, going home and having to tell all those other kids their mom is gone. It was one of the most difficult things ever. So that's pretty much it. But Jessica was completely healthy. She was offered ivermectin before, and she said, no, I don't know what it will do to the baby. That's how protective she was of her kids. And so she wouldn't take it. But when she was in the hospital, she asked for it, that and hydroxychloroquine, and they told her, no, we don't give that. So.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It makes my blood boil listening to that.
Yeah.
I commend you. I don't know how you are able to tell that in such a strong manner. So I am curious, since you've looked at their records, did they have not vaccinated all over the chart?
I didn't really look for that, but they, you know what, they gave her like 4 doses of remdesivir. Mm-hmm. Because when we were talking to the palliative care team, I said, how did her kidneys fail? Did she have problems with her kidneys? They're saying, no, that's what COVID does. Mm. And I said, in strokes into her, you know, her brain and, you know, everything. And they said, that's what COVID does. And they also blew a hole in her lung. And yeah, she suffered, but she did that all for her baby.
Yeah.
She's a real strong mother.
What about you, Teresa? Did they have your father's vaccination status in
Oh
the.
yeah, yeah. I looked and remind you, he was just 4 days in the hospital, but right on the front page, unvaccinated man, 70 years old.
Mhm.
Mind you, just like for everybody listening, my dad just 5 days before was helping me build a deck, okay? Perfectly healthy. I saw Jessica just a few days before she went into the hospital at church, perfectly, walking around just a little bit. But yeah, on the medical records, yeah, right away, unvaccinated. And that meant that, the treatment, I think you mentioned Julie earlier that she was denied food, she was denied several things right off the bat. She was starting to text while she was laying right in the hospital, but Matt was not allowed by her. He was not vaccinated because of his vaccination status. He couldn't be right next to her. Limited hours, I think it was 2 hours, at least in my dad's case. I think the same was for you. Our priest went in. Some people went in, but they couldn't see everything that was happening all day long. And the main things of the story with Jessica is, you know, she went in for just simple breathing treatments for steroids, things that she thought, and then all of a sudden this big protocol is rolled out, that we knew, Jessica actually, because she was a grassroots movement, she was pretty savvy about a lot of the things. So she said no to remdesivir. She said no to ventilation initially. She did not want to be ventilated, as Julie explained. They held and strapped her to the bed. She was fighting at her last hours because she knew that once they vented, she wasn't coming out of it, as she told her husband. That's how intense she knew about what was happening. But she still believed that with her knowledge and just telling the hospital, I don't want these things, that her rights would be protected.
Mhm.
And what I want the nation to know is that that's not true. All of a sudden, there's somebody else calling the shots, quite literally, from these hospital systems. As we come to know, they're all plugged in with pharmaceutical companies now. And this whole nationwide protocol, as we came in every single story that we take on and we listen to, about 25 similar things happen in almost every single case. The biggest one is that the gaslighting, they make you feel stupid for asking. I know, Julie, you mentioned, when she had asked for some of the other things, hydroxychloroquine, no, they kind of shrug it off as if you don't know what you're talking about. I know that there are many doctors who did not lose any patients, and I think, Dr. Bowden, I think you'll testify to that a lot of the treatments that we were asking for, people around the nation, other people were having major success with them. And so to be denied and humiliated and gaslit, that know that we were stupid for asking, that we don't know what we're doing, and almost, patronized, to say, how dare you, insult my intelligence. I'm the doctor here. I know what I'm doing. My question is, once I saw Nicole Siratek go before, I think it was the House or the Senate, I forget which one she went before, but she said, they're killing my patients. My question is to all these hospitals, when they started to see that their protocol wasn't working, and yet they still proceeded forward and without any changes, and being asked for treatments that we knew were actually working. They didn't allow that. And so it might be a good question for you, Dr. Bowden, and if you have any insight on what you believe the hospitals were doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's criminal. And in one point, too, is even if they didn't want to give ivermectin, we had monoclonal antibodies. Those weren't controversial. But for
Yeah.
some reason, they would not give people monoclonal antibodies once they went to the hospital. It was just not, it was forbidden. It was very odd. And, my journey was I started giving people monoclonal antibodies. They worked really well. Then the government took over distribution and it became harder and harder to get them for some reason, to the point where I couldn't get them anymore. And then I started using ivermectin. But that's another topic that doesn't get enough attention, is these monoclonal antibodies. They were not controversial. They worked really well. And yet the government basically took them away. And then, the remdesivir, and you're right, there was no effort to pivot. I mean, it's one thing if they started with this government protocol and, tried it, but logically, a doctor who's really being a doctor wouldn't continue using the same thing over and over again if it's not working. You would, I mean, what my approach was, throw the kitchen sink. If somebody is high risk and having severe symptoms, I just did everything I could possibly think of to do to try to save them. And I don't understand, doctors have become, they're employed. They don't have a say in patients' care. the way, I'm very independent. I don't contract with any third parties. So, it's me and the patient. But when you've got these administrators butting in, the hospitals limit what you can prescribe because you have to enter it into a computer and there's a drop down menu. So if the drug that you want is not on the drop down menu, you basically just can't prescribe it. Now, I'm not saying that the doctors don't deserve the fault, but that's part of the issue is that, if the hospital controls what's available to patients. So what happened afterwards? Did y'all go to the doc? Did you fight with the doctors, the hospitals? You report anybody? What happened?
This is really, and I'll start there because after that had happened, we thought we were just hit by a freight train. We couldn't believe what had just transpired in 4 days, only 4 days in my dad's case. Yet every single one of my family members were recovering, on the ups, on the mend. But what was the difference between his story and my story and everybody else in my family was that he was the only one that went to the hospital and received the hospital treatment. So after that, we're like, there was something that happened in the hospital. Clearly, we knew at that moment in time when we knew we have to get him out of here. They're killing him. And so we didn't know how or exactly what they were doing until later, where we figured out it was the actual protocol, including the drugs, the isolation, just the whole method of treating or lack thereof of treating. So we ended up getting medical records after several months, but I was then recommended to some organizations that were collecting stories. We were learning that we weren't the only ones who were, that this happened to, that there was something going on in the hospitals. And so we were connected with a national group of other members around the nation. That's how I met Gail Seiler, our president. She had wrote an article in Epic Times that mentioned that she was a survivor, that her husband, rescued her from the hospital. And as soon as I read that story, I said, we're not the only ones. And so that gave us motivation to come together to understand what had happened. So yes, at that point, then I reported the doctor in the hospital as well. VAERS went in all the systems and said, "Hey, please open an investigation." I had now working with a different group at that point in time for the past 4 years. We went to different hospitals around the state of Michigan, protesting, saying, "Please open an investigation. There's murders happening here." And we ended up calling it murder because once you identify that something is killing your patients and you continue to do it knowing that it's going to kill your patients, that it's very clear that there was a line in the sand that was crossed there. And we had whistleblowers also from the inside saying, "Hey, no, they did know." A lot of people were forced with their paychecks saying, "Hey, you're going to lose your job. There's going to be lawsuits." And a lot of people, were afraid of the system, but went along with it anyway. And some people just knew full well that it was going to kill, yet they proceeded. And so at that moment in time, we understood, hey, we have got to fight. We have got to raise awareness. We have got to bring this to the attention of the president, of the vice president. And if anybody's listening, especially, RFK right now, I actually went to go meet with him personally. I lobbied, I went to his campaigns. I met with him personally for a very brief moment. And I said, please get rid of remdesivir. And he stopped dead in his tracks. He asked me for my name and he said, "I will." So because I saw his video that he knew about it. So, and then I saw some podcast as well later in time of many other doctors and other people going and making them aware that the situation exists. And now it's national. We're calling on all the leaders of these organizations to step up and now acknowledge and open the investigation that yes, the protocols were killing people, and we know that. Julie, I know that you also, were reporting, and also you're here today and telling your story. But did you also report the hospital as well?
No, but I got a lawyer, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'll take the case." And then he realized that there's what did Whitmer put through to the PrEP Act, so you couldn't sue anybody that had anything to do with COVID. And the mainstream media was saying that like ivermectin, and I don't know, we were protesting, and all these nurses they had to walk by, they parked across the street and they had to walk past us, and they just walked past and walked past. And finally one stopped and said, "You guys are right." Oh. But, she's afraid she's going to lose her job. People need their jobs. So, yeah, it didn't, I was ready to sue, and it didn't do any good. It just didn't.
We had followed very closely, and we've aligned ourselves following the Grace Shara trial out of Wisconsin. In fact, I was present there for it with a handful of us who went in the courtroom itself to hear all the facts of that trial of the young girl, Grace Shara, who was killed, who they did not resuscitate. There was many facts in that case, and just watching what was happening. And the problem is that this PrEP Act, put immunity around all these hospitals and the workers they're in, that basically they can do whatever they want during COVID. If they had a COVID-19, diagnosis, they could do anything they want so long as it was the protocol. And even if we knew that other things contributed to their death, like remdesivir, they still put COVID-19 on, on the death certificate, which means that they are, they're immune from being held accountable and liable. So
we need the Office of Inspector General at HHS to launch an investigation. And I know that how many stories do you have at this point?
Yeah, I have listened to over about 2,000 stories. We know that, like I said, there's over 1 million easy, we believe over 1.6 million that are just like this. Although different groups collect the stories as well, and some say, oh, they died of COVID. We know the truth that actually, if you open up those records, most of them were given remdesivir. Most of them you're going to see in almost every single situation. They were force medicated. They were denied alternative treatment. They were isolated. They didn't have an advocate. Every single case has these things, and we want accountability for this.
Well, thank you for doing this. What do you think about legislation to prevent this from happening in the future? Are you working on anything like that?
Yeah, we are working across the nation, and right now it's state by state. So we've had Oklahoma pushing a lot of different cases right now. Michigan, No Patient Left Alone Act, you'll see. We're really working it to John James in Michigan to have him sponsor different bills. We want to make sure that people are not left without an advocate, because that was a big issue to allow them. In Jessica's case and my father's, if you were right there and allowed to see everything that they were doing, and we want to make sure that that never happens again. So we're taking avenues in that approach, but we also really are calling on to lift the PrEP Act, because these hospitals need to be accountable for these things. We do need to reevaluate our hospital protocols, and you're probably the best to kind of talk about that, having the good inside view of a lot of these things that need to be changed therein. But we're calling for hospital reform. These are the types of things that we're pushing for. But it's slow going, because we need these bills sponsored, and we need people to actually hear these cases and open investigations.
Yeah, one thought I had is, the patient that I tried to help in Texas who was on a ventilator, they had determined that he was not going to survive, and yet they would not let him have ivermectin, and his wife sued to get the ivermectin. And we actually won, and the court ordered the hospital to grant me emergency temporary privileges and access to the ICU without delay. Well, of course, they defied the court order. But my thought is that, if you are a licensed physician in the state, that you should be able to go into a hospital and help a patient that you have a relationship with, regardless of if you have privileges. In an emergency situation like that, you should be able to get a second opinion from a doctor you trust, not just a doctor in that hospital. As long as your license is in good standing, it shouldn't really matter if you have, that the privileging process is just sort of it's like a club more, it's like a country club more than a patient safety issue. So that's one avenue that I would like to work on, but we should work together and try to get multiple things going in these state legislators, because it's like I said at the beginning, it's just not getting enough attention. It's super important. And from what I understand, they're still giving people remdesivir. Am I right?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. In our organization,
Yeah.
Betrayal Project USA, we're a victim-led organization. Volunteers such as myself take in these stories, and every day, every week, actually, we are intaking quite a lot of stories of this still happening. You know, I think just probably 2 months ago, we helped with Children's Health Defense to help a young child. I think it was 2 years old, that they were going to give remdesivir to. So yeah, this is still
Oh.
happening. And and if you were to just go out and ask just the general internet about remdesivir, there's a lot of false information about there that no, it's perfectly healthy, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
We know that that's not the case, and we know that people know that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
And it needs to be stopped. Personally, what I've been doing is I've been working also as a precinct delegate in Michigan, working to meet our attorney generals that are campaigning right now, our Secretary of State, a lot of the folks in your own state, meeting with them and pushing to open investigations, making them aware of the issue, because we need help at the state and national level.
Yeah. Tell us, everybody, the name of your website. How can people find you?
Absolutely. If you guys are hearing a story similar to this one, or if you have your own, our website is betrayalprojectusa.org, betrayalprojectusa.org again. And we have support groups almost every night of the week. We have PTSD groups. We help there's a whole host of information as well, some resources on there, help how to find an advocate if you're looking for a good doctor to help you. We help point you in the right direction as well. So come find us if you have a story. We'd love to. You're going to get probably someone like myself to field your story, document it, and make sure that these stories are never forgotten.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. I'm so sorry that this happened, but I applaud you for fighting back, and thanks so much for coming. We'll be following your stories and try to get some traction on this. Again, like I said, the Office of the OIG, the Office of Inspector General of the HHS, you could launch an investigation into this. We have lots of documentation. We have charts showing that they euthanize patients in the hospital. I personally have seen charts. I reported a doctor to the medical board and the police. I filed a police report after reviewing somebody's chart and seeing that the patient was euthanized with morphine and insulin to hasten his death. And of course, that got completely ignored. But we know that was happening on a widespread basis during the pandemic, and we really need somebody to step up and investigate. So Julie and Teresa, thank you all so much for coming, and we will keep in touch.
Thank you, Mary, Dr. Bowden.